Waking up with the sun is one of the best habits I try to implement. It's not so much about being the early bird and catching the first worm. For me, it's time to warm up and ease into the day ahead. I have a GoPro Hero 9, and setting up a time lapse to capture the elegance of a sunrise is a fun activity to add some playfulness into the morning. Initiating a time warp, if I'm going for a run, allows me to speed up a 5K so that it's interesting and fast-paced to grip the attention of someone, should I wish to share it. Knowing when to use a time lapse and when to use a time warp has impacted how I go about filming, but it has made the editing version of myself have a great time when it comes to adding the moments to music. This video is for you if you're a beginner and you don't understand the difference between a GoPro time warp and a GoPro time lapse. Give me a big thumbs up if you're ready to dive straight into it. I'll explain the difference between a time warp and a time lapse, as well as give a few tips on how I use them for a cinematic feel to my videos. You may recognize the term time lapse from cinematic videos with epic sunrises and sunsets. At least that's how I was first introduced to a time lapse anyway. To take a time lapse, you place your GoPro on a stabilized surface or mount that will remain stationary for the duration of your shot. So under time lapse settings, you select how often your GoPro takes a photo. My GoPro has interval options between half a second and an hour. This snippet is an example of a GoPro time lapse at half a second interval, 4K and a wide lens. I then sped this up in editing by 1000%. So the first thing to understand with a time lapse is that it is most effective when your GoPro is on a stationary surface. And perhaps what we wouldn't normally see, because the change was too gradual, we are now able to experience in a short period of time. This is maybe why a sunrise time-lapse or a sunset time-lapse always feels so magical. So here are some ideas for how you could potentially use a time-lapse. A sunrise, a sunset, clouds moving, the buzz of a city awakening, a city cooling down, something growing, something rising. My rule of thumb is that there is a clear before and after. The time lapse will document the change. Time warp is different though. You are able to incorporate movement and still achieve somewhat of a stable shot. This is what GoPro has to say about their time warp feature. Time warp is hyper smooth applied to time lapse video. It allows you to capture super stabilized time lapse videos while you move about a scene. Increase the speed up to 30 times to turn longer activities into shareable moments. I find that in cases where there can be that temptation to record so much slow motion to introduce a cinematic feel to a video, it's often fun to throw in a little bit of a fast forward instead. Also, when using slow-mo, there is often an emphasis on capturing a variety of angles to keep things interesting. With a time warp, things are a lot simpler. You can have someone follow you, you can follow someone else, or you can decide to attach the GoPro to an accessory as you move in a direction. A tip that I do, which you might find interesting, is that I usually add a time warp to a specific build in a piece of music.
24K got nothing on me, make you want it forever. Tryna play a game, but you don't play for keeps. Messing with a girl from the east side, yeah. Kinda love you, wanna build your dreams on, yeah.
I found that this has increased the energy and the pace in a lot of my vlogs. Here are some ideas for what you could consider if you wanted to use a time warp. Running, cycling, walking, linking two scenes together, a quick tour of a building, revealing an object, pulling away from an object. Again, as a basic rule of thumb, I use a time warp to introduce a different feel to a video. What I mean by this is that a time warp is fantastic to use to speed up an activity that is really difficult to consume in its entirety in a normal speed duration, or when you've used so much slow motion that your video is begging for a different feel. I've also seen time warps used in travel vlogs when somebody arrives at a destination and then speeds up to get to a specific tourist attraction. So where I would use a time lapse to show a before and after of a scene, I would use a time warp to show the start and the finish of an activity. Personally, I like using a time warp and a time lapse as a way to introduce a scene or to link two scenes together. However, time-lapse could also be a cinematic video in its own right. If we think about it, there's no hard and fast rules of how to use time warps and time lapses anyway. I try challenge myself to play around with how I use them so that I don't get stuck in a rut. But if you had to make me choose, if you're like, Margs, just tell us what do you really think, then I would say I'd use a time lapse as an establishing shot. And a time warp to perhaps speed up an activity that is a little bit too boring to watch in its entirety. But ultimately, both of them add to the overall feel of your video. But yet, they are so different. So if you find yourself looking at your GoPro, ready to film, but you just can't remember what is the difference between a time lapse and a time warp, the basic rule of thumb is that a time lapse is where you keep your GoPro stationary, so you will put it on a stationary surface or on a mount and it will remain still for the duration of the before and after that you're trying to capture. And a time warp allows you to incorporate movement when you're filming an activity. So I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, go ahead, give me a thumbs up, and my treat, I will leave a video for you in the end screen that is also GoPro related, which I'm sure you'll find interesting. Also consider subscribing to my channel if you'd like to see more videos from me in the future. But other than that, have fun with your GoPro and enjoy taking your time warps and time lapses, and I look forward to seeing you in one of my next videos. Take care guys, bye bye.